Hello, everyone. Good morning. And those of you joining from the other side of the world, good evening. Welcome to the launch of a briefing paper by Progressive Voice, Setting the Tinderbox Alight, the Humanitarian Crisis in Myanmar's Dry Zone. My name is Rin Fujimatsu. I'm the Advocacy Director at Progressive Voice, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's event. The burning of homes and villages that you just witnessed in the video, that is from Sagaing Region, where the Myanmar military has been conducting scorched earth campaigns, like in many other parts of Myanmar, as they continue to carry out their campaign of terror. So today for 1 hour, we will hear from our distinguished speakers who will discuss about the expansive humanitarian challenges and local responses on the ground in Sagaing, Magwe, Mandalay regions since the coup attempt on 1st of February 2021. So before I begin, a few housekeeping notes that I'd like to share with you. As I just mentioned, this event will be for 1 hour. There'll be a Q&A session following the discussions from the speakers. So please send all questions to the panelists through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining with us through the Facebook feed, you can also provide your comments or questions in the comment section of the Facebook chat. If you're from the media, it would be really helpful if you could provide your name and affiliation when sending in your questions. That will let us know that you're from the media. Also, as you just saw, we are live streaming this event and recording this event as well. So it will be made available on our website and on our Facebook page. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump into today's discussion. So the launch of this briefing paper on Myanmar's dry zone, Sagaing, Magwe, and Mandalay region, it's very timely. While it's not received a lot of international attention, the dire situation on the ground over the past 2 weeks has been enormous. The Myanmar military, they have laid siege on several communities in southern Sagaing region, leaving in its path torched homes, massacres, and devastation as they commit war crimes and crimes against humanity with total impunity, as you just saw in the video we just played. Local news, such as from Myanmar Now, have reported extensively on the recent attacks by the Myanmar military in these dry zones, which have been strongholds of resistance against the military attempting to seize power. So this Myanmar military's intense operation, it's really triggered this mass internal displacement and a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe in Myanmar's Bama majority populated dry zone. Having never faced large-scale Myanmar military attacks, these communities neither have the fully developed local structures nor time-worn responsive measures in place to address such crisis. Despite the lack of these experiences, in addition to challenges in aid distribution, and then the failure of the UN and ASEAN's response, local communities have rapidly developed significant measures to alleviate the immense human suffering. So today, Progressive Voice will present the findings of this briefing paper that gives a snapshot of the humanitarian situation in the dry zone and present recommendations for your considerations. We're honored to have with us Siama Grace, a local youth humanitarian aid worker from Sagaing region, to share with us her expertise and experiences with humanitarian challenges and local aid distribution. Siama Ken Omar, the chairperson of Progressive Voice, will also offer her analysis of the current situation, including the challenges with regional and international approach to humanitarian aid. We are actually also honored to have with us Adelina Kamal. She's an independent expert on humanitarian aid and a former executive director of ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, also known as AHA Center. She will offer with us her response to the findings of the briefing paper following our discussion. So we look forward to hearing from you, Adelina. Okay. Without further delay, I would like to invite Jack, Progressive Voice's research officer, to present the findings of the briefing paper. The floor is yours, Jack.
Thank you, Ren. I'll just share my screen. Right. As Rin mentioned, I will be speaking broadly to the contents and findings of the briefing paper. This paper provides a snapshot of the humanitarian challenges and local responses in Sagaing, Magwe and Mandalay regions from the start of the attempted coup until July of this year. These regions cover a large geographical area of central Myanmar, which is often referred to as Myanmar's dry zone because of the hot, dry climate, where water is scarce and the land is flat. For the military junta, these regions, Myanmar's dry zone, form religious, cultural, and historic significance in the Burma Buddhist majority collective mentality, as it is the birthplace of the Burma dynasty and the heartland of Buddhist education. In the wake of the attempted coup, there has been a strong resistance to the military junta from resistance fighters and CDM within these regions. These regions face a massive onslaught of attacks by the military junta through airstrikes from fighter jets and helicopter gunships, ground attacks, massacres and burning of villages. One interviewee even described it as, "There is literally no more villages to burn in Sagaing region." We have seen the junta's violence reported in the press, but much remains unknown about the humanitarian challenges and the needs on the ground. This paper offers a snapshot into the situation of these regions to try and start a dialogue on how to best support the people of the dry zone. Many local people in Myanmar's dry zone have never experienced military attacks prior to the coup and do not have a pre-existing specialised social structures or mechanisms to deal with displacement, unlike many ethnic minority communities who have developed these systems, local capacity, and expertise over decades and cycles of displacement. Despite not having a long history of humanitarian crises and responses in Myanmar's dry zone, robust local responses have developed in a relatively short period of time since the attempted coup. And these are the initiatives that the international community should support. A month or so has passed since we finalised the briefing paper. Since then, we continue to see the situation in Myanmar deteriorate, especially in the dry zone, with the junta continuing the same patterns of violence, scorched earth policies, atrocity crimes highlighted in the briefing paper itself. Recently, the junta and pro-military militia PUSLT burned down 600 homes in Yasago Township in Magwe, forcing 4,000 villagers to flee. At the start of August, junta troops burned the remains of 18 bodies, including a 10-year-old girl, after they were viciously massacred in Yamabin Township in Sagaing Region, which had also suffered heavy airstrikes from Mi-35 fighter jets and ground troop attacks. According to the most recent data from UN OCHA, a total of 1.2 million people in Myanmar are internally displaced. And in Sagaing Region, 470,000 people have been internally displaced since the military coup, attempted coup on 1st of February 2021. OCHA estimates that 14.4...
Jack, so sorry. I think the PowerPoint is not moving forward.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Here we go.
Sure. There you go. Yeah, you have it there.
Thank you. Okay, so OCHA estimates that 14.4 people are in need of immediate humanitarian assistance inside Myanmar, and this number is likely to grow. The needs are immense, yet the international community, international humanitarian organisations and UN agencies are unable to reach those most in need. Interviewees who have provided humanitarian aid to their communities have told us that there are no international humanitarian presence in Myanmar's dry zone currently. IDPs are being supported financially and subsisting on aid provided by local humanitarian actors, civil society groups, diaspora groups, local administration forces of the revolution, the National Unity Government, neighbours, relatives and friends. Meanwhile, the Myanmar military is using humanitarian aid as a weapon. They repeatedly block, confiscate, destroy and manipulate the distribution of aid for their political and strategic advantage, choosing where and when it is distributed, attempting to starve communities who resist them. This is a time-worn tactic they have used over and over again, and Yet the international humanitarian actors and UN agencies still work in partnership with the Myanmar military, despite these red flags. These actors instead should adopt a solidarity approach to humanitarian assistance, putting the welfare, human rights, human security, and agency of displaced communities and local humanitarian actors at the centre of the solution to the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. There must be meaningful commitment to the localisation of aid, using local frameworks and recognition of the agency and effectiveness of local actors, as well as recognising the nexus between distributing aid through the junta and the suffering that that creates. International actors must stand in solidarity with the people of Myanmar, not work with the military junta, which is the root cause of this crisis. The main recommendations from the paper are do not work in partnership with the Myanmar military in the provision of humanitarian aid. Instead, facilitate cross-border aid delivery by supporting and working in equal, meaningful partnership with local humanitarian organisations, border-based groups, and civil society organisations, in full respect of the agency of local communities. The UN and international humanitarian organisations must apply funds directly and flexibly to local humanitarian organisations, so they are able to respond effectively to the humanitarian crisis on the ground, while also relaxing onerous reporting requirements to allow civil society and local humanitarian organisations to focus on the emergency situation at hand. Cross-border aid does not enter ethnic areas. With support and funding, it can reach communities in Myanmar's dry zone. So thank you for your attention. I'll hand it back to Rim.
Thank you very much, Jack. I think we just had a slight technical issue with the PowerPoint, so we'll be happy to drop that in the chat box, so please look out for that. Thank you very much, Jack, for giving us a brief overview of the briefing paper. We have made the briefing paper as well as the press release available in the chat box. If you don't see it there, please give us a message and we'll be happy to send it to you again. Great. So now I would like to introduce you to Sama Grace. Sama Grace is a graduate. She was actually born and raised in the village of Myang Township in Sagaing Region. She's also a member of the Sagaing Youth Committee. And after the coup attempt in 2021, she had to quit her professional job and dreams and participate in the Spring Revolution. So at the beginning, she participated in protests, campaign, boycotting materials of the military products, then continued to take part in supporting the people and raising funds from people inside and outside of Myanmar to support her community in providing humanitarian aid. She continues to work supporting also public education and health as a grassroots youth. So we're delighted to have you with us today, Grace. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, alo mingla. Okay, Rashi. Oh, me alai usau ne. Jampa setega. Sesuti bangmya sama. Kecing kaya kayine kayini shane. Ruhi jari bawin. Tayina bangso poma. Luka sana keme muri. Go julung kera. Jumaro nyaduriya dige baw. Natau naset kunin now masulushi. Analu bide sete. Analu sete jampa. Luka sana keme mu lumisamu pimus julung muri go. Jumaro riga nete duwa. Tia chunga chani yabare. Nyadu nyadari poma. Analu sete yesa janjo muri ya. Dune di bareshe. Sagaing tai hasui, new dollar ima, tomorrow dola bangrega, lema boma trabio, a gem pet, the bank mountain niladi do, a kusui, the dark and bidu gagway subio, dollar in Lugans in the guba, the sign the met, those sound like a pare. See, masui, bidu miaga, secreting as a kind dying ludama, pures and met puke javare. Analusiteha, Mubo, Chile, Turuya Ochoye, Say, Pinyai, Tamai, Sare, Yeniarigo, Le Pepo, Josani Bare. Piduriha, Gango Makame, Nishisejo, Tisaula Gere, Analusitego, Loma Ocho Quim, baby, she de Lene, Secoane, Dolaima, bowing Kemurita. Hence I needed Dolay, Eazuri, Buba Biro, Taito needed Dreta, Akusui, Nizing Yese, Li Zhao, Gong Zhao, Yi Zhao, Tona Muriga, Nami Zhao Sagain Dine, Shim Yazao Maguidainu, and Yami must sit alone in a pineapple. အကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီကလှုပ်ဆောင်နေခဲ့ကြတာပါစကိုင်းမကွေးတိုင်းတွေမှာဆိုရင်အင်တာနက်ဖြတ်တောက်ခံရတာ9လကျော်ကြာခဲ့ပါပြီနေ့စဉ်ရက်ဆက်ကျေးရွာတွေပြည်သူအိုအိမ်တွေမိရှုဖျက်ဆီးတယ်ကျေးရွာတွေကိုလက်နက်ကြီးလက်နက်ငယ်နဲ့ပစ်ခတ်ခဲ့တယ်ပြည်သူတွေစုဆောင်းထားတဲ့ကောက်ပဲသီးနှံတွေမျိုးစပါးတွေကိုဖျက်ဆီးတယ်ခိုးယူမှုတွေပြုလုပ်တယ်ပြည်သူတွေကိုအရှင်လက်လက်တက်တယ်မီးရှို့တက်တယ်အစုလိုက်တက်ဖြတ်တယ်ဒဇာကန်တွေအနေနဲ့ဖမ်းခေါ်သွားတယ်တားပြိုသမီးပြိုတွေရဲ့အနာဂတ်တွေကိုလည်းဖျက်ဆီးတယ်စတဲ့ဖြစ်ရပ်တွေကိုအညာမှာလက်ညှိုးထိုးမလွယ်ဒုနယ်တွေအများကြီးပဲပါဇက်ကထုတ်ပြောဖို့ခက်ခဲတဲ့တွန်းဆုံမှုတွေနဲ့ရက်စက်ကြမ်းကြုတ်မှုတွေကအညာမှာအများကြီးဆိုမှအများကြီးပါပဲဒီတစ်ပတ်အတွင်းမှာဖြစ်သွားတဲ့ဖြစ်ရပ်တွေဆိုရင်ရေလေကျွန်းမှာအင်ဂျီ600လောက်ရှိတဲ့ကြေးပါကို3ညတိုင်တိုင်မီးရှို့ခဲ့တယ်နေအိမ်900ကျော်မီးထဲမှာပြာကျသွားခဲ့တယ်မြင်းမှုမျိုးနယ်မှာဆိုရင်အခြေခံပညာသင်ကြားနေတဲ့ကျောင်းတစ်ကျောင်းကိုလေရင်6စီးနဲ့အသွားပြန်လုပ်ပြီးတော့လက်နက်ကြီးလက်နက်ငယ်နဲ့ပစ်ခတ်ခဲ့တယ်အပြစ်မဲ့တဲ့ကလေးတွေကပညာသင်ကြားနေရင်တန်းလန်းနဲ့လွယ်အိတ်တွေထားပြီးတက်လူပြီးပြေးခဲ့တယ်တချို့ဆိုဖက်နှက်တွေတောင်မပါခဲ့ကြပါဘူးရေဦးမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒေသခံမျိုးသား4ဦးနဲ့မျိုးသမီး16ဦးစုစုပေါင်း20ကိုစစ်ကောင်စီကဒဇာကန်အနေနဲ့ဖမ်းသွားခဲ့တယ်ရင်းမာပင်မှာဆိုရင်လည်းရင်မောင်တိုင်ကစံတဘာထုတ်လုပ်နေတဲ့အဓိကကုတန်းရောင်းဝယ်ရေးလုပ်နေတဲ့နေရာတွေကိုအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီကတားကတ်ထားပြီးတော့ဖျက်ဆီးမှုတွေကိုပြုလုပ်ခဲ့တယ်ကဏီမှာဆိုရင်စစ်တပ်ကကြေးရွာ300ကိုမီးရှို့ဖျက်ဆီးခဲ့တယ်ပြည်သူ20ကိုဖမ်းဆီးခေါ်ဆောင်သွားခဲ့တယ်ကျေးရွာအုပ်စု6စုကဒေသခံ2,900ကျော်ဟာဘေးလွတ်ရာကိုဖက်ပြေးတိမ်းရှောင်နေခဲ့ရတယ်။မြောင်မှာဆိုရင်စစ်ဘေးရှောင်1,000ကျော်ရှိနေခဲ့ပြီ။လက်ရှိမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့9လပိုင်းမှာဆိုရင်ကျေးရွာတွေကိုမိရှုဖျက်ဆီးတာအိုးအိမ်တွေကိုပျက်စီးဆုံးရှုံးမှုတွေကတိတ်ကိုများပြားလွန်းလာပါတယ်။ဒီလိုပဲအာဏာလုစစ်တပ်ကလေကြောင်းပစ်ခတ်မှုတွေကိုအဓိကထားပြီးတော့ပြည်သူတွေပေါ်မှာဆက်တိုက်လှုပ်ဆောင်လာခဲ့တယ်။အနည်းဆုံးတော့လက်နက်ကြီးမကြဘူးတဲ့ရွာဆိုတာရှိသလောက်ပါပဲ။ကိုဗစ်ဖြစ်ကြတဲ့ကတပူပေါ်နှစ်ပူဆင့်ဆိုလို့ပြည်သူတွေရဲ့အခက်အခဲကိုပိုကြီးအောင်စစ်ကောင်စီကပြုလုပ်ခဲ့တယ်။လူသားချင်းစာနာထောက်ထားမှုအကျပ်တဲကိုပုံမကြီးထွားအောင်နီးလန်းပေါင်းစုံသုံးခဲ့တယ်။ဒီလိုပြည်သူတွေကိုပြကြတဲ့ထိရောက်အောင်လုပ်နေပေမဲ့ပြည်သူတွေကအရှုံးမပေးပဲအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ကိုတနေ့ထက်တနေ့ပိုပြီးယုံမုံဒီတော်လှန်ရေးကြီးကိုအမြန်ဆုံးပြီးဖို့ရအတွက်လှုပ်ဆောင်နေကြရတယ်။ပြည်သူတွေရဲ့တော်လှန်မှုဟာနိုင်ငံကိုမထိန်းချုပ်နိုင်တဲ့ပြည်သူတွေရဲ့တော်လှန်မှုကြောင့်မို့လို့နိုင်ငံကိုမထိန်းချုပ်နိုင်တဲ့အကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ကတော်လှန်ရေးအားကောင်းတဲ့စကိုင်းတိုင်းမကွေးတိုင်းတွေကိုအပူတပြင်းဘက်စုံကနေပြီးတော့နေ့စဉ်ရက်ဆက်စစ်ဆေးနေတာတွေဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပြီးတော့စကိုင်းတိုင်းမကွေးတိုင်းမှာရှိတဲ့ရွာတိုင်းကအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီမီးမရှို့ထားတဲ့အိမ်မီးမရှို့ဘူးတဲ့ရွာဆိုတာမရှိသလောက်ပဲအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ရဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်မှုတွေကြောင့်ဖြစ်ပေါ်လာတဲ့လူသားချင်းစာနာထောက်ထားမှုတွေစက်တဲကိုနယ်မြေခံပြည်သူတွေအဖွဲ့တွေဟာကိုတက်တဲ့အားနဲ့အချင်းချင်းရိုင်းပင်းကူညီနေကြရတယ်။ကိုတိတဲ့ပြည်တွင်းပြည်ပကွန်ရက်အချိတ်ဆက်တွေကနေပြီးတော့အကူအညီတွေတောင်းခံပြီးတော့လိုအပ်တဲ့ပြည်သူတွေစီကိုအရောက်ပို့ပြီးဖြန့်ဝေပေးကြရတယ်။ရှားတဲ့အကူအညီတွေကတော့အကန့်အသတ်ရှိပေမဲ့ရသလောက်ကိုကျမတို့တွေထိထိရောက်ရောက်မြန်မြန်ဆန်ဆန်နဲ့ပို့ဆောင်နိုင်ခဲ့တယ်၊လှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ခဲ့တယ်။ကျမသိတော့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင် UN တို့ INGO တို့လိုနိုင်ငံတကာအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေကကူညီတာမျိုးရှိမနေပါဘူး။အာဏာသိမ်းမှုမတိုင်ခင်ကတော့အဲ့လိုဖွဲ့စည်းတွေကဖြစ်ပြီးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့ကူညီမှုတွေပြုလုပ်ခဲ့တယ်အခုတော့ဒီဖွဲ့စည်းတွေကတိတ်ဆိတ်နေခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့စစ်ဆောင်ပြည်သူတွေလိုအပ်နေတဲ့အသက်ရှင်တန်ရေးအကူအညီတွေကိုဒီနေ့ထိမြေပြင်မှာတကယ်ပံ့ပိုးနေတာကတော့ကျမတို့မြေပြင်ကအဖွဲ့အစည်းတဲ့လူတွေပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပြည်သူ့ဆိုရ NUG ကလည်းကူညီပေးမှုတွေရှိပါတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့လိုအပ်ချက်နဲ့ရှင်လိုက်မယ်ဆိုရင်အဖက်ဖက်ကခက်ခဲနေတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်ဒေါ်လာရေးကာလမှာကူညီနိုင်တာကအများကြီးနည်းနေပါသေးတယ်။မြေပြင်မှာတကယ်လိုအပ်ချက်တွေကများနေပါသေးတယ်။ပြည်သူတွေကိုကူညီပေးတဲ့အခါမှာကြုံတွေ့ရတဲ့အခက်အခဲတွေစိန်ခေါ်မှုတွေကလည်းအများကြီးပါ။အဲ့ထဲကဆိုရတာတွေကအကူအညီနည်းပါးတာတွေကူညီသူတွေကိုအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ကဖမ်းဆီးတာတွေချင်းချောက်တာတွေအကူအညီပေးနေမှုတွေကိုတားဆီးတာတွေဖျက်ဆီးတာတွေလူယူတာတွေပြင်ပြည်သူချင်းချင်းဖေးမကူညီတဲ့ကိစ္စတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်လို့မရအောင်ဖြက်လေးပြက်မဟာဗျူဟာကိုသုံးတယ်ပြည်သူတွေဘာမှမကြံဘာမှမရှိအောင်ခိုကိုးရမဲ့အားကိုးရမဲ့အောင်မျိုးမျိုးလှုပ်ဆောင်နေပါတယ်ပြဿနာတွေရဲ့အရင်းခံကအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီတက်ဖြစ်ပါတယ်ကျမတို့အခုလိုမျိုးအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်ကောင်စီရဲ့ရက်စက်ကြမ်းကြုတ်မှုတွေ စတာတွေကိုကျမတို့မြေပြင်မှာရှိတဲ့ပြည်သူတွေကိုဘယ်လိုထိထိရောက်ရောက်ကူညီနိုင်မလဲဆိုရင်ကျမအနေနဲ့ကူညီနိုင်ဖို့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့ပြောပြချင်ပါတယ်မြေပြင်မှာရှိတဲ့လူအနေနဲ့တောင်းဆိုချင်တာကတော့ဒေသခံပြည်သူတွေကအဓိကဘာတွေလောက်တိုင်းစားတောက်ကြတယ်မိခိုအားထားကြတယ်ဆိုတာကစဘယ်နေရာမှာရှိတယ်ဘယ်လိုတွေရှောင်တိန်နေရတယ်ဘာအကူအညီတွေလိုအပ်တယ်ဘယ်လိုလုံလုံခြုံခြုံဘာတွေကိုပေးပို့ရမလဲဆိုတာကအဆုံးကျမတို့ဒေသခံနယ်မြေခံတွေကအတိဆုံးဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါကြောင့်ပြည်သူတွေကိုထိထိရောက်ရောက်ကူညီဖို့ဆိုရင်ကျမတို့လိုပြည်သူတွေနဲ့ပြည်သူတွေရဲ့ယုံကြည်မှုရပြီးသားဒေသခံနယ်မြေခံအဖွဲ့တွေကွန်ရက်တွေကိုဓာတ်ရိုက်အကူအညီပေးပို့ဖို့ကျမအနေနဲ့တောင်းဆိုချင်ပါတယ်နောက်တစ်ခုကတော့ကျမတို့ကမြေပြင်ကအခြေအနေနဲ့ပြည်သူထံဘယ်လိုတည်ယူပို့ဆောင်ရမယ်မျှဝေရမလဲဆိုတာတွေကိုပုံမသိနာလဲဖို့စ조사လှုပ်ဆောင်ပါတယ်မိဘပြည်သူတွေကလည်းထိရောက်စွာပံ့ပိုးပေးနေတဲ့စီကိုချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့ပို့ဆောင်ပေးကြပါကျမတို့ကကူညီဖို့အတွက်အစဉ်သင့်ရှိပါတယ်လိုအပ်တာများကိုလည်းချိတ်ဆက်ကူညီဆောင်ရွက်ပေးနိုင်ပါတယ်နိုင်ငံတကာလူရှင်တွေအနေနဲ့ကျမတို့ရဲ့တည်ရှိနေမှုလုံနိုင်ဆန်းကိုအတိအမဲ့ပြုဖို့အတွက်လည်းကျမဒီနေရာကနေပြီးတော့တောင်းဆိုပါတယ်ရှင့်ဟုတ်ကဲ့အခုလိုနားထောင်ပေးတဲ့အတွက်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ရှင့်
Thank you, Grace, so much for your very powerful intervention and such clear calls to those who are wanting to support the situation in Myanmar, to fully engage and see the local communities, local responders as equal partners in the current humanitarian crisis. Of course, you said that namely that military is destroying the future of our generation, that these burning of villages and these four cuts policies are meant to really fracture the fabric of these communities. And the way to support these communities now is to ensure that these fabrics are maintained, that there is enough support, funding, material that is being funneled and channeled to these local actors who know the ground context the most. So thank you so much for this very powerful intervention. I would like to now hand the conversation over to Sagaing Omar. Of course, I think many of us joining this webinar is familiar with Sagaing Omar's work as a long-time democracy and human rights activist. I think there is no need to say more here, but just to hand the floor over to you, Sagaing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ring. Thank you, Ring. Thanks so much for the moderation. And also, I really want to thank both Jack and Grace for your invaluable contributions to this very critical discussions. And I also want to actually take the opportunity to thank the Progressive Voice, the team, because all of you, I know all of you put so much of your heart, head, and hands to make this paper happen, to be able to come up with this paper. So I hope that your effort, collective team effort for the people in dry zone will actually be heard. Also looked seriously by the international actors in particular. And I also want to appreciate Ms. Adelina Kamal for joining us. I really look forward to your response and comments to our paper. Please also note that your work, your messages that you have been sharing in public has been taken very seriously and very valued by the Myanmar people. And in fact, your op-eds been translated into Burmese and have been published in the social media as well as instant media as well. So I just want to also thank you for all the great work that you have done. And I look forward to your response to our paper. And thanks to all of you for joining today, of course. Your concern and your keen interest to hear what we have to share with you today. We hope that you will not just stop listening from us here in this session, but you will actually bring far and forward with our recommendations to those who are the decision makers, those who really need to see the ground as we see and as you will hear from us, and make the right decisions to support the people of Myanmar, because this Myanmar people's revolution needs to win sooner. The revolution will win no matter, but the sooner will be the better, of course, to really end the immense suffering unnecessarily at the hands of this murderous military junta. The humanitarian situation in dry zone in Myanmar is in deep crisis, that's for sure, and for so many months. And in many ways, it is a microcosm of the larger humanitarian situation throughout the country. While the crisis is deepening, the response from the international community is nowhere near proportionate to the gravity of the crisis. At least 1.2 million people are internally displaced, as we learned from the UN data, but we know that data can be still underestimated, knowing of the areas that, where the data cannot be collected. And many more are suffering from the terrible economic situation the junta has plunged the country into, as it keeps trying with its ongoing 18 months attempt to take control of the country. As of August 30th, at least 2,257 people have been killed by this junta, and 12,118 people are currently held in detention, with the junta's lethal crackdowns showing no signs of abatement. As we have heard on this panel today, the junta is waging an all-out war on the people of Myanmar. This military continues to conduct area bombings, shelling, killing of innocent civilians, and burning of villages with absolute impunity that they have enjoyed for many decades. As the 5-year commemoration for the Rohingya genocide has just passed last week, we are acutely reminded that justice and accountability that remains elusive for these grave international crimes committed by the same military against the Rohingya 5 years ago, that is perpetrating fresh war crimes and crimes against humanity against the wider population in Myanmar today. Yet the international humanitarian actors and UN agencies are continuing business as usual, failing to stand with or listen to the people of Myanmar. Some of you may have already even seen the news about the UN FAO submitting credentials to the junta. I've heard also the UN OCHA has just signed or about to sign the MOU with the junta. These actions are contrary to do no harm and impartial principles. As you might have seen, 864 local, regional, and international organizations called for the UN General Assembly to withdraw the Special Envoy's post, and for the Secretary General to take a personal role in the UN response to the Myanmar crisis. It should be noted that this call is solely based on our past 20 plus years of experience, reflections, and assessments on this Special Envoy position, that we came to conclusion that no matter who is mandated, no matter who takes up this position, this post, as it is now, is doomed to fail again. For sure, for the UN and international community as a whole to address Myanmar crisis. As a matter of fact, our calls for the Secretary General to intervene in the humanitarian crisis is not new. At the height of the third wave of COVID-19 last year, 443 civil society organizations stated that the military is deliberately exacerbating the COVID crisis for its own political and strategic gain, while collectively punishing the public for rejecting their attempt to seize power. Like they are weaponizing humanitarian aid now, they also weaponized the pandemic. At that time, we called for the SecGen to intervene in accordance with the Security Council Resolution 2532, calling for a global response to combat the pandemic, with the UN playing a key coordinating role. But our calls have been repeatedly ignored. With every inaction by the UN or the international community or the ASEAN, the military's lethal attacks against the people increases, and the number of those displaced by these military's violence grows. There have been plenty of statements of concern where the UN SecGen, the Special Envoys, the Security Council, Human Rights Council, and the General Assembly all have urged the junta to allow humanitarian access to these regions, but to no avail. The issue is that there have been no consequences for the junta's, there have been no consequences for the junta's non-compliance. And statements of concern just ring hollow. It is well known that the UN and international agencies have been repeatedly denied access in delivering humanitarian aid to dry zones and ethnic areas. Clearly, working or partnering with the perpetrators of the gravest crimes under international law, who are also the creators and root cause of both previous and current humanitarian crises, is not providing a solution to the current and dire urgent needs on the ground. The international community and the ASEAN must stop forming partnership with the terrorist junta to deliver the aid, because it's very simply, it violates the very principles of impartiality and neutrality and do no harm that's been set by these international actors. There is nothing neutral or impartial in partnering with and providing aid through those responsible for the crisis. In fact, it is morally wrong. If we examine the response from the ASEAN's AHA Center has not yet delivered aid to Myanmar after 16 months of the ASEAN's 5-point consensus. That's even according to the military junta's mouthpiece newspaper. ASEAN has not been impartial, neutral, or independent when it comes to Myanmar, and thus the AHA Center as the intergovernmental agency will inevitably breach humanitarian principles. As the center was not designed to respond to conflict and suddenly not designed to address a 70-year-long multidimensional crisis. Another problem is the AHA Center allowing the junta-controlled Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief and Resettlement to sit on the governing board, despite the junta being illegal and have no control over the country. This effectively allowing the junta take control of aid distribution, while will inevitably allow also the junta to advance their scorched earth attacks using the humanitarian aid. In working with the AHA Center, or in any way complementing its work on Myanmar, organizations and donors will also be complicit in supporting the junta's further weaponizing of aid, while cutting off the scarce resources that could be distributed to the people directly through the local organizations that directly support these communities most in need, both in the border areas and beyond in the country. Myanmar crisis must not obscure the long structural, systemic, and political challenges that top-down models of internationally led humanitarian aid work can risk further reinforcing. Attempts at accessing those in need by seeking approval from the junta is not only ineffectual, but also further emboldening the perpetrators who are the architects of the crisis. So it will be complicit in the junta's atrocity crimes. An alternative to this model has already been forged by local actors. And this is something that we would like for you all to look into, as discussed by our sister Grace today, and many other humanitarian aid providers and local civil society organizations. Rather than focusing on reinforcing traditional internationally driven operations of aid, where international agencies provide direct aid to those in need, the donors and humanitarian organizations and the wider international community must recognize and respect the strength, agency, the knowledge, expertise, and the capacity of these local groups and networks of aid providers, like Grace already said clearly. We want for the international community to really support them to take the lead in this mission, precisely because the international agencies are at the moment unable to operate on the ground, while these local actors are effectively saving lives on the ground. There is a larger structural issue that we must work to address towards a long-term change also. The local organizations should not be treated as just beneficiaries or implementing partners for strategies developed by the international organizations that most of the time, in many times, do not reflect much of the inputs or the reality from the ground. Rather than focusing on further capacity building, the international actors must listen and really learn from those local aid actors and support and provide them direct, flexible funding that is not riddled in burdensome reporting requirements, which is a major impediment to localization of aid. During the most recent International Humanitarian Day, the interim UN humanitarian coordinator recognized local responders as the backbone of the Myanmar response and discussed supporting the country's humanitarian village. Such words, in order to be meaningful, must be backed by action to ensure that more support is given directly to the local responders and ensuring that they are the ones who are in charge of their own futures in creating a healthy, effective, and supportive humanitarian village. This includes supporting the border-based local ethnic humanitarian and CSOs that have been responding to multiple crises over the decades of the Civil War, and also since the attempted coup in February last year. They are an integral part of the humanitarian response and have provided time-worn solutions in creative and innovative ways to meet the challenges that they themselves and their respective communities have had to endure over decades. While they work along the border, their support is not limited to the border areas. That's something we really need for the international community to understand. With sufficient resources and support, they can further provide aid to communities beyond their own ethnic regions and areas and into the dry zone and other areas as well. Their networks expand across Myanmar, and with decades of experience and the work that they have done, they also have existing reporting and accountability systems in place. So while exact estimates of aid delivered from the border is of course difficult to determine because there are so many local people, diaspora communities are also really trying and supporting their communities. Refugees International says that CBOs and CSOs along the border estimates that as of July 2022, over $10 million in aid had been provided from the border to over 1 million people in Myanmar since the coup attempt, noting that much of this is in cash assistance, which can reach people far from the border and the most practical. Of course, the most practical solution to address the Myanmar crisis is for the UN and ASEAN to assert all pressure possible to stop this military junta from committing further atrocity crimes and give up this coup attempt, which has in fact failed after 18 months. This includes imposing arms embargo, including on jet fuel, further targeted sanctions on militaries and their associates businesses, in particular against Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, and referral of the situation to the International Criminal Court, or setting up an ad hoc tribunal as we've been calling for. While also individual countries should really step up with their actions, such as the UK and Germany, just last week recently joining the Rohingya genocide case at the ICJ. Lastly, I want to remind to all of us that humanitarian aid should not and cannot be a replacement for these actions that I just mentioned to you, nor should it be a tool to enter into a political dialogue with the military junta, even if anyone will ever think of such dialogue will actually work. Using humanitarian aid for such political purpose will not only suddenly violate humanitarian principles, but will also cause more harm to the people on the ground. Rather, the focus must be placed on supporting and channeling resources to local humanitarian responders. They are definitely a part of the solution to the crisis, and also with the determination to forge a future Myanmar free of this terrorist military junta. And we need your support more than ever before, now, before we get into further escalation of the crisis on the ground. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rin.
Thank you, Sama Ken Omar. I really have nothing that I can comment on or add to your very, very clear and succinct call for further action from the international community and the region. So with that, I would like to invite Miss Adelina Kamal. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, she has joined us to offer her response to the findings of this briefing paper following our discussion today. So without further ado, Miss Adelina, I'd like to hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Rin, and thank you, Progressive Voice, for inviting me to comment on the new briefing paper recently launched. I'd like to thank you, Progressive Voice, for coming up with this paper. I actually feel that this paper reinforced and complements my findings that I have made before. And I've written quite a lot about it, and also I have shared my thoughts about it through some webinar and other opportunities. And it's basically advocating for a solidarity approach whereby humanitarian actors, including the international humanitarian community at large, will take a cautious decision and take side to channel humanitarian assistance in solidarity with those affected by the crisis. So thank you very much. I think if I may comment, one thing that actually quite distinct from this briefing paper, it focuses on the humanitarian situation in the dry zone. While my findings so far have focused on the situation at the border, whereby I have advocated for the humanitarian community to channel aid through these local humanitarian actors at the border. And it's quite interesting to find that there are some similarities in terms of the situation and atrocities, as well as the basically the needs, the humanitarian needs and the humanitarian the human rights violations on the ground. But there are also quite distinct differences in a way that, as mentioned by the previous speakers, these regions never experienced serious attacks by the military junta in the past, and now they have to gather basically their networks and come up with alternative solutions to provide humanitarian aid to the people. And the fact that this paper reinforced for some kind of a network between those in the dry zone, as well as the humanitarian actors working at the border, that actually quite interesting. And I think that kind of a network needs to be supported. So again, thank you for this additional perspective that I will also take for my research and my advocacy work. Second, I think that those who are present in this webinar have been converted, the way I see it. I noticed the list of participants. Many of those are not coming from the international humanitarian community. So I really hope that this briefing paper will be distributed further, because we need to change the mind of those that are not yet converted. And many of these are not here. And then we need actually their help, right? To be able to do what is actually right for the people. So I think the challenge for us, in particular for Progressive Voice, how to make this briefing, how to, like what Ken Omar mentioned, how to move forward and advance and basically further spread the findings from this briefing paper to the audience that that we need to reach, and that is the international humanitarian community. Now, talking about the international humanitarian community, normally they will concern about three things. One is access, and then the other one is safety, their own safety, and then accountability. Now, let's talk about the access, because it came out in the report quite a number of times, and it's also mentioned in one of the a briefing paper or the report by the UN OCHA recently, I think dated June, that this dry region is hard hit. But I guess the international humanitarian community, including the UN, the donors, NGOs, and ASEAN and partners, need to really ask this question. And this is an uncomfortable question. Have this local population, and we're talking about access here, yeah, the most concerned issue from the humanitarian perspective. But let us ask this uncomfortable question. Have this local population become hard to reach population because of the decision that we make? That is to work through and with the junta and make them as the eighth partner. So that's the first question. Second question, have this local population become invisible from the aid perspective because we choose only to cater those that are permitted by the junta to be helped? It's been like 19 months after the coup. So let's ask this question. Honestly, ask this question to ourselves. And we know the answer already. We know, and you all know, that as a humanitarian and as the international humanitarian community, we have a choice to make. So it's about your decision. So if we say that these places, these regions are hard to reach, is it not our job as a humanitarian and the international humanitarian community to provide the resources, the support, and the conducive environment for these people to be helped? Therefore, I think it is very crucial for us not to only ask these two questions that I have posed, but to also assess the humanitarian gains. As mentioned by the report, we know how much the international humanitarian community can cover in the past 19 months. And the humanitarian gains are little or even none. And many of these humanitarian gains are proclaimed as progress, as the sweetener for diplomatic dialogues, for political dialogues. So let's face it, have we been able to reach out to them, not only in the dry region, but also the border, as well as the Rohingya communities who have been displaced for 5 years. So we do have a choice to make. We have a decision to make. And it's not, there's no shortage of reason. There's no shortage of options and alternative routes. And these are the solidarity routes that we can consider. So I will leave it at that, because I think these questions are really the basic questions. We have been presented with the details, with the facts, with the voices from the ground. And thank you, Progressive Voices, for giving those voices unheard to be heard. So what else? I have a paper that I have prepared based on my consultation with over 30 border-based humanitarian groups, academic and other stakeholders. And basically the paper outlined that it's not only the humanitarian principles that have been violated by working through the junta, but there are also the ethical and moral reason, and there are also the health, the political, the regional stability, the economic stability. There's so many reasons. And all of this reason is a long list. And compare that to the effectiveness of relying on the local expertise and the resilience capital that have existed through the local humanitarian actors, be it at the border as well as in the dry zone. So yeah, the choice is there. Let's make the right decision. It's not that we don't have other options. We do. It's actually your decision to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adelina Kamal, for your very thoughtful questions to the panelists, to Progressive Voice, as well as all of those joining us today. I think especially what you were saying about the invisibility of those, who are seeking and need the help, our structures and the way that international community and regional community operating in Myanmar, is it actually making it more inaccessible? I think those are questions that has to be tackled and has to be done in a deep thinking way for many of us. In addition, we also look forward to your briefing paper as well to guide us in answering some of these questions. I'd like to just note that we do have some questions coming in. You can send your questions through the Q&A chat box. I do have to note that we are coming up on the 1 hour, so I will like to request that we will continue on for a bit longer, perhaps for about another 10 to 15 minutes, so that we have at least a chance to go through a round of questions and final comments from the presenters. So with that, we have one question that we'll begin with. We have here, thank you for your research and presentation. What logistical barriers do you think international government bodies and/or funders might face in providing direct funding to local humanitarian organizations and responders? For example, transferring foreign currency into Myanmar, and any recommendations of how to address these. So I think I will go ahead and open the floor and start with this question. Would any of the panelists like to take this question on? Sam,
sure, Rin. Yes,
okay.
sure. Thank you. Well, thanks for this question. Just also, I would like to actually give a general comment also for this particular. There's some of the details are a bit challenging to actually, interact on this public webinar, which I prefer not to, for the sake of the security and all concern. So, but I think let's well, if you look at the past 18 months, the Myanmar people have been doing this already. I think it's a quite telling of, you know, where the work is done on the ground when the international actors are not able to have access. And things are being done, and there are many ways that can be done. And we've been doing it. So I think the question that remains is like, will the international donors and actors and agencies and organizations put the trust and confidence in our people? The very people who are facing the violence, the very people who are trying to save their lives and lives of their communities, and the very people who are actually of the country of concern that these international agencies and UN agencies claim to be helping save their lives. So when the people themselves are able to do that on the ground, what is really lacking is the support, like we have said repeatedly again and again. I think that support needs to come, but that support will come only if these international actors can actually also come out of their own box and come out of their own comfort zone of doing things as usual before, or in other country situations. Myanmar crisis is different. And people have been dealing, and I think that is where the actors need to look at of the local agency. And we, for how many months, been calling for this. And so far, like Adelina already said it very rightly also, like, you know, we would like to see the actors, policymakers really change their mindset, right? To see the things on the ground, how that can be practically done. And we would like to have an engagement. We would like to have a dialogue with them. We would like to actually explain to them, not from this public webinar, because of the sudden concerns for the security that we have to be cautious of. But then we should be able to talk to these international groups, agencies, and organizations more in this partnership way, where we can also tell them, where they can also ask us what exactly that, you know, that their concerns and worries. I think that is something that, you know, when we talk about localization of aid, what we don't see yet so far is really like supporting the local leadership to come up. And I think that is something that we need to see from the international actors. I mean, one step forward for this kind of question will be to have a meeting, a private meeting. I think that's going to be a good way of interaction to really look into the possibilities as well. So I would probably just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sema. Any of the other panelists would like to discuss on this?
Can I say something?
Of course, please.
Yeah, just to complement Kinomar, I think as I mentioned earlier, whoever that want to provide humanitarian aid to the people in Myanmar really need to answer the question first, right? And that question, and really need to make the decision first. Are you going to channel it through the junta, or you channel the assistance around it, right? And if we choose not to work with the junta, and that is actually the approach that we have been advocating, there will be ways to do it. If you believe in the resilience, in the local resilience capital of the local population in Myanmar. And this strong resilience capital has been formed for decades. And we're talking about the border base. So they have the knowledge of local context, they have the experience, and above all, they have the trust. What they need is resources. Now you're talking about access. There are also alternative and creative ways of getting access through the people. So the way I say, don't don't question about how to do it. Make that decision first, because the how will come to you when you have already gained the trust after you make that decision. So that has to be made first. Over.
Thank you very much. If there is no other comments on this, if I may go to the second question, I think we have time for perhaps one more and a round of comments. Thank you to all the speakers. Now the UN is giving an excuse that they are not working with military directly and just collaborating with non-military bodies, but those non-military bodies are serving as the main pillars to strengthen the military regime. By supporting SAC-affiliated bodies, the junta-affiliated bodies, the UN is supporting the military-controlled institution and system. It is also noted that the UN Security Council resolution is discouraging cross-border assistance. For that, I would like to know about the local thinking behind that and your opinion on this decision. Thanks. Thank you so much for this comment, as well as this question on the UN Security Council resolution. It's a little unclear which resolution this may be. So if the person, we have also allowed anonymous questions for security purpose. So if this person would like to clarify which resolution, that would also be helpful. But maybe broadly speaking on the UN Security Council, Sam and Omar, I think with your decades of experience in engaging with the UN, perhaps if you would kindly speak to this question.
Sure, Rin, thank you. Yeah, like you said, I'm not aware of any UN Security Council. First, there is no UN Security Council resolution on Myanmar yet. So that's one thing. But if there is any UN Security Council resolution on the cross-border aid, that's something that I'm not following on much on. So that's something we need to look back and see how that is actually reflected or refer to Myanmar in any way, which I'm not so sure if yeah, I don't think there is anything specifically mentioned on Myanmar from the Security Council with regards to the cross-border aid. I mean, like, you know, the reality is, like, when it comes to the cross-border aid or like supporting the border-based organizations to do this humanitarian aid, that has been done for past 3 decades already, at least, including the UN. I mean, including the US, Canada. So these countries, donors have been supporting the cross-border aid to the internally displaced people who, like, there have been a protracted displacement in Myanmar, sometimes crossed the border to Thailand, became refugees, or crossed the border back to Myanmar side, became IDPs again, back and forth. So there's been cycle of displacements, like Jack also mentioned in his presentation. So the international donor agencies are not new to this, including the EU. It's not new to this. In fact, like when Myanmar opened up in 2010-11 onward, many of these donors just shut the doors and shut their support immediately and blunt, like, many of them very, very abruptly to like supporting the border-based groups on the border. But regardless of that, my point here that I want to make is that for these donors to remind of themselves and reflect on what have done before, and yet with that kind of abrupt cutting or shutting the support to the border, or even like, many donors, in fact, even like put pressure on the local groups to even return to Myanmar, while the groups themselves are so vulnerable in their organizations or individuals, who are in the organization. And yet these donors didn't think. They just like, if you want the project, just go back into Myanmar kind of, pressure. That was really, really difficult. I mean, but my point here is the local groups, they remain with their resilience, their resistance and their local agency. And they carry on with their devotion, their commitment for the long sustainable solution for their communities. I think that is what that these international actors need to really recognize. So that's one thing that I want to share. Coming back to the first point of the question, when our anonymous guests ask about or comment on the UN, given the excuse that they're not working with the military directly, but just collaborating with the non-military bodies. I'm sorry, what kind of non-military bodies are they talking about here? Yeah, I mean, like, seriously, their credentials are given to the military junta when their MOUs are signed with the military junta. And the ministries are directly under the direct control of the military junta. So what kind of non-military entities are they talking about here? Unless, you know, they will come and work with the people's government and NUG. Will they do that? I'm sorry, it's such a hypocrite. I'm sorry, you know, I have to say, and I know, I mean, I can imagine how these agencies will hate me for saying that, and I will keep saying that for the sake of the people of our country. It's such a hypocrite. So don't even, you know, bother to give any excuse. Can you imagine, like, they question to the local organizations under such immense pressure and attack by the military, saving the lives of the people on the ground. These local responders are questioned, or those local responders are not given trust by these international actors, while these international actors are happy to dress up and go to the Naypyidaw and shake hands with the military, give their credentials, allowed to be taken photo op with the big smiles. Is it okay? I mean, seriously, is it really okay? When they can trust this military killing the people, they cannot trust the local responders who have nothing but the will and commitment to save their people. I'm going to stop here, Rin. Back to you.
Thank you, Sama. I think here we have a few more questions, but I think we have ran over time quite a bit. So what we can do is we can post some of these questions online, and we'll do our utmost best to offer answers to some of these comments and questions that we have received today. Thank you to all of those who have joined us in this webinar and have engaged with this very important conversation today. I just want to hand over the floor for one last remark to all of the panelists and respondents for a quick 1 minute final remarks, if I may. Perhaps we can start with you, Jack, and in the order of the speakers that we had today.
Thanks, Rin. I think we should put it in really simple terms. What is working and what is not working in terms of the delivery of humanitarian aid currently. What's not working is working through the junta. They're blocking, confiscating, destroying aid. It's not getting to the people that most need it. Sometimes it'll get to certain parts, cities, but not into the countryside. What is working is supporting local humanitarian actors, their networks, working with them on the ground. We know that there are some challenges, and the first question mentioned barriers, but actually local actors are attuned and they're able to overcome these barriers because they've had decades of experience to do so. And in Myanmar's dry zone, networks are able to overcome obstacles to get aid to the people that most need it. So if you just look at what is and what isn't working, and if donors really answer the questions that the other panelists put to them today, then I think the answer is very clear. Support local and solidarity with the people of Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Sama, Grace? Sama, can you hear us? Oh,
okay. အားလုံးမင်္ဂလာပါအခုလိုမျိုးကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီခံစားနေရတဲ့ ဒီခံစားနေရတဲ့ဝေဒနာတွေဒုက္ခတွေကိုချိန်ပေးပြီးတော့နားထောင်ပြီးဆွေးနွေးပေးကြတဲ့အတွက်ကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်ကျမတို့ကမြေပြင်ကအခြေအနေတွေကိုနိုင်ငံတကာနဲ့အများပြည်သူတွေပုံမသိအောင်နားလည်အောင်လက်ဆင့်ကမ်းပေးတဲ့ progressive point နဲ့ဖွဲ့သားတွေကိုလည်းအများစုညာသားတွေရဲ့ကိုစား Grace ကနေပြီးတော့ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်လက်ရှိကျမတို့ပြည်သူတွေကစစ်ဘေးတဘာဝဘေးငက်ပြက်နေတဲ့ငက်ဘေးပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒါတွေကိုကြံ့ကြံ့ခံရင်အသက်ရှင်စံဖို့ကြိုးစားပြီးတော့လှုပ်ဆောင်သွားပါမယ်ဒါတွေကိုကူညီဖို့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်နိုင်ငံတကာအနေနဲ့ကနိုင်ငံရေးစိတ်ဆန္ဒရှိဖို့ပဲလိုပါတယ်ကျမတို့မြေပြင်ကပုံရက်တွေကချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့ကူညီပေးသွားပါမယ်ကျမတို့ကိုလည်းဓာတ်ရိုက်အကူအညီတွေပံ့ပိုးပေးဖို့လည်းကျမအနေနဲ့ထက်လောင်းပြီးတော့တောင်းဆိုပါတယ်ကျမတို့ကအခုလိုမျိုးတာဝန်တွေလှုပ်ဆောင်ဖို့အခုလိုမျိုးကိစ္စတွေကိုဆွေးနွေးဖို့ဆိုတော့ဘယ်သူမှတာဝန်ပေးမထားပါဘူးပြည်သူတွေကိုကူညီဖို့ပြည်သူ့ကျန်းမာရေးပြည်သူပညာရေးစတဲ့လူသားစာနာကိစ္စတွေအကုန်လုံးကိုလည်းကျမတို့ဥဆောင်ပြီးတော့တာဝန်ယူပြီးတော့လှုပ်ဆောင်နေပါတယ်မြေပြင်ကလူငယ်တွေနေနဲ့လည်းဒီလုပ်ငန်းဆောင်တာတွေကိုကျမတို့ထက်ထဲဝင်လှုပ်ဆောင်နေတယ်ဒါတွေကိုအကျိုးရှိရှိအသုံးချဖို့အတွက်လည်းကျမတို့ကြိုးပမ်းနေကြပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ကျမတို့တယောက်ချင်းစီပေါ့နော်ပြည်သူတွေအနေနဲ့တယောက်ချင်းစီကဒီຫນွေဦးတော်လှန်မှာကြာရတာဝန်နိုင်ရတာဝန်ကိုကိုစီထမ်းဆောင်ပါစုလားလို့ပြောရင်ကျမအနေနဲ့အားလုံးကိုနှုတ်ဆက်ပါတယ်ရှင့်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်
Thank you, Sama. Sama Kinomer?
Well, I said a lot already, but I just want to end with my encouragement to Grace for your courage and leadership for the community on the ground. And you just said, if I hear that correctly, you just said that you don't have mandate. But I have to say that you have the mandate. Your mandate comes from your community. You have the mandate from the people of Myanmar, both inside and outside the country. The mandate that we need to question is those international actors, the UN agencies, that are NGOs. Where did they get the mandate from? Where do they get the mandate from? Do we give them our mandate? Do our Myanmar people give them mandate to do what they're doing now? Shaking hands with the military, giving the credentials, signing the MOUs? I'm sorry. You and the youth, the Spring Revolution youth, and all of the courageous heroes on the ground, the courageous people, the local responders on the ground. You all have the mandate, full mandate from all of us, from the people of Myanmar. What more, right? And think the question that we should raise is to those who are signing MOUs with the military junta. Where did you get the mandate from? Thank you. Thanks, Rin. Back to you.
Thank you. Ms. Adelina, would you like to have any last words?
Thank you, Rin. I will do that to also answer the question from Dao Ning Ang in the Q&A. So basically, the short answer to that question definitely is a matter of lack of political will by the international community. The argument for supporting the solidarity route is strong. To answer the two basic questions that I have posed earlier in my intervention require a strong political will. There is no shortage of reasons for disengaging the military junta, and there is no shortage of options for supporting the solidarity route. So then that brings me to the third question. While there are many reasons to engage in solidarity with the people of Myanmar, the third question is, are you willing to help? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adelina. And thank you again to all our distinguished speakers for this very fruitful discussion today. And thank you to all of those who stayed with us despite the webinar running beyond the 1 hour. If I may, just to end this event, I'd like to share a passage from the briefing paper itself that also quotes Sama Kinomar's previous opinion piece on humanitarian aid provision in Myanmar. The briefing paper quotes, the approach of working around local, ethnic, and community-based organizations rather than working with them represents a colonization of aid practices, a denial of locals' agency. To localize humanitarian aid, the UN and international agencies must form meaningful and equal partnerships with local organizations and take a solidarity-based approach to addressing the humanitarian crisis that places the agency of locals at the center of the solution, end quote. So just as the Spring Revolution that's been absolutely formidable in resisting the junta's attempt to seize power from the people of Myanmar for 19 months now, forging a future Myanmar free from the terrorist military junta. The future of Myanmar's aid, or the humanitarian village, this must also be in the hands of local aid responders. This bottom-up approach to humanitarian work is vital, not only for effectiveness, but I'd like to quote Hugo Slim, former head of policy and humanitarian diplomacy of ICRC. Localization is a matter of self-determination and political justice. I really hope that this webinar has been fruitful in your considerations. And as Ms. Adelina had mentioned, we hope that you will share the briefings and findings as well as the recording of this webinar widely within your networks. It is available on our Facebook and will be made available on our website. If there's any interviews or further questions, you can please contact us through our website, progressivevoicemyanmar.org, or the contact details that were provided to you in the chat box today. So I'd like to thank all the panelists and the respondent today again, and for all of you for joining us in this webinar. I really hope, we really hope that you'll join us again in our future webinars. Have a really great day, and to those of you from across the world, good night.